right, I'm here for another HR Engage podcast episode. And as always, I'm very excited to welcome my next guest, Rod Francisco. Rod, how you going?
Good, thanks, Jonathan. Another beautiful day here in Queensland.
Rod, it is always beautiful in Queensland. Well, actually, there are lots of periods of rain as well, but it's particularly beautiful today. But it's great to speak with you because I wanted to have you on the podcast for a while because you've just got such great experience in your background. You've worked at council, you worked in some name brands, you've currently got a role with Ari. I would like to do a laundry list. It's a huge list, your resume, of what you've done in the HR and people and culture space. But I want to give it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I think a lot of people don't know I come from a very different background to the HR space. So for my first 20 odd years, I was in the military and I worked in the army in logistics and maintenance. So I didn't come from a traditional HR background.
Mm-hmm.
In my final few years, I completed my master's in HR, which the Army sponsored before, and I was going to go into that personnel space, but Army wasn't quite there yet. I was probably 5 to 10 years ahead of my time in terms of wanting to do HR in the Army. So I decided to move on from there and join the resources sector and cut my teeth on some pretty tough sites and mine sites and worked my way through that in terms from a HR perspective and did some time in Sierra Leone. Wasn't my first choice of places to go, but it was an exciting and interesting time.
And how long did you stay in Sierra Leone? Was it quite a big period
It
of
was
time?
almost 12 months, and
Wow. Yeah.
it was really interesting when we talk about ethics and integrity and so on. As you're working, I can't remember the index for fraud, but I think Sierra Leone was in the bottom three
Dear.
globally. So very interesting times, but also really taught you about fundamentals of HR and how to make that work. Because you quite literally were working with spreadsheets and pencils and paper. We didn't have sophisticated systems, so it was really base level, fundamental HR, and it worked really well. So very, very proud of the work we did over there.
Your start in the mines section or resources section, sorry, and obviously going overseas to an area that you probably didn't necessarily expect. That background, because and we'll talk about a bit more about what you're doing currently and what you've done in the recent past, but that background, that obviously you talk about that basic HR, you just got to get to the nitty gritty, systems, processes, what we always hear about constantly in the HR space. Going backwards in time for you, what was that like to just really get down in the dirt and really go from the base?
It taught me one thing.
Mm.
HR can be really, really simple. And we have a tendency to make it overly complex. So when we're talking about building policy and procedural frameworks, I've seen them get way out of control and we make them hard. And you would know as a lawyer, Jonathan, the more you write, the more that somebody else will misinterpret for you. Yeah. So we keep things simple, keep them easy to understand. And then you start to really build with the teams around their behaviours is what does this sentence mean rather than what does this paragraph mean? And you can really hone in on the behaviours and get people aligned with their culture. So I think that's the one thing it taught me right from the get-go was don't overcomplicate it.
You've got this great experience in resources. What else in your background? Because I'm dying to tell people about your background, but I'd love to hear it in your own words, mate.
I've served when I served in the military and I worked in maintenance and logistics in operational spaces. And in austere environments, you learn to do things efficiently, but making sure it was effective. So you really had to work hard at that. And look, there was a time there where I was the Deputy Chief of Staff of the British-led multinational division in Southeast Iraq based in Basra. It was 13,000 people, operational conditions. We spoke 14 languages. You've got to hone in on keeping it simple and really making sure that how you do things is really effective first,
Yep.
then make it efficient.
So that's simple, effective, and efficient. You learnt that from your work in the army. From there, you went to the resource section. What else was there in your journey into human resources?
I think that the key thing for me when I moved into human resources
Mm.
was I think every time I studied IR, the IR laws changed.
Yeah.
So it was one of those sort of things. I've just learned how it all works. We've just had an election, and now it's just changed.
Yeah.
And what it really taught for me was the things that you need to know, the fundamentals to HR. You need to know them well.
Yeah.
You need to keep building those capabilities. And every employer I've ever worked for has always 100% supported me in my professional development as a HR practitioner to make sure that the work I did was, at that expertise level, up to date, current, really focused on the work we need to do today in the legislative environment we're in. So I've been very fortunate at that, and I've always espoused that with all of the teams that I've led in HR is about maintaining their professional development, whether they work in health and wellbeing, whether they work in organisational design and development, whether they work in L&D, IR, doesn't matter. Just make sure they are as capable as they can be.
the the whole idea of capabilities, I think it's a really interesting point you bring in particular around your background. So you've got formal qualifications as well. So you've got, I think, it's a master's degree in HR.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when you did that, did you do that as part of a? I suppose the question is, did you do that because you felt that was the natural progression, or did you do that because it was an opportunity? Like, what was the circumstance in doing that formal qualification?
I reached that point in my military career
Mm.
where I had a choice of going to uni and studying my master's degree in HR
Yep.
or going to another university and studying my master's in integrated logistics. So I had a choice of which career path I was going to go.
Yeah.
So I chose HR because the concepts of leadership, values, culture, organizational design and development, and creating organizations really, really appealed to me. It's where my passion is. My passion is about leadership, and I think that's one of the things that HR people can really nail in their organisations, being passionate and the leader for leadership programs, but also adding in the values, the behaviours of an organisation, both individually and collectively. And when you add those two together, that's your culture. It's not just leadership alone, it's not values alone. You've got to put those two together, live and breathe and lead your values every day, and you'll create the culture that you want.
That and I've heard you talk about this quite a lot, Rod, about leadership and values and culture. Is that really the reason why you're passionate about HR? Because you are a very passionate person about human resources. Is that really the reason why you're passionate and enjoy human resources?
I think that, and the fact is that there's so many things that make a business tick, and the fundamental of it is people. And if you can get
Yep.
your people practices sorted and simple and effective, then your business is going to hum. And every finance manager or CFO you'll find will always want to know, how can I make HR or people practices much more efficient? And we can do that by making sure that they deliver the right outcomes, because people will see the value for money for them. And that becomes your passion. And a lot of HR people I work with go, I've never really thought about it like that. And I've gone, make it work for the business and create those efficiencies on effective outcomes. And the finance team will love you.
So you're espousing a synergy or a combo collaboration between finance and HR. I mean, maybe we don't hear that a lot, Rod, but you're espousing this.
Yeah, look, I have never had a bad relationship with the finance manager, commercial manager, CFO, however they work. Always worked in closely with them. Uh, Part of that is creating the sense of understanding in them that we're not just a cost, that we're a
Hmm.
value add to the business. So you really got to walk a mile in their shoes type thing to understand that. I've also identified that quite often a lot of finance people who have HR teams working alongside them or within their own teams, particularly CFOs, they don't necessarily understand how HR works. And if they don't understand how something works, then they're very unlikely want to give it more money. So what
Yep.
you really want to do is drive that understanding in the finance team and show them the value. We might spend a bit more money on recruitment and getting people, but it means we'll spend less money on recruitment in the longer term because less people will leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just a good point there. Recruitment's been one where that combination, that collab between HR and finance has been discussed. Obviously, your payroll side as well is probably the other big one as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, payroll is one of those. It's one of those organisational design footballs almost.
Yeah.
Is it finance doesn't want to give it to HR, HR doesn't want to give it
Yep.
back to finance. I have literally worked in an organisation where I owned payroll, then I didn't, then I did, then I didn't. I have worked at organisations where payroll says we sit here. It just whether the manager comes through that door or that door depends on who we report to.
Wow.
So
Wow.
look, it's an either or. My view is that if you build the right relationships between HR and any of those functions, it doesn't really matter where they report to.
And Rod, you also have a pretty prominent role in Queensland with the with ARI, which is Australian Human Resource Institute. Tell us a little bit about that and your role.
So when I left the army and joined the resources sector, one of the first things I was told by a friend of mine was join your industry body. So I did, and I joined the mentoring program. I'm still in touch with my mentor from 2006, so we
Oh,
still
wow.
catch up every now and then. And he said to me, he said, "What do you need a mentor for?" I said, "Well, I'm new to the industry." And he goes, "No, you're not. You're just new to this type of industry." So I did that. I worked in a variety of different sort of capacities as a volunteer with ARI over the years.
Yep.
I joined this. I then became the Mackay Network convener,
Yep.
running the activities here at Mackay. Got asked if I wanted to join the state council, so I nominated for state council and was elected to that. Had a really good time in doing that, and then as part of that process, the president had to stand down because she'd reached her tenure, and I was not paying attention at one state council meeting, and suddenly, congratulations, you're the president. It's like, so always remember when you're at these meetings, is pay attention to what's going on. So, but seriously though, they asked me, and I was more than happy to be the state president.
Yeah.
It's been a really, really good role for me in terms of from a volunteering aspect. Yes, you're busy. Yes, you've got a lot to do, but I take pride that in 2024 we reinstated the Queensland RE State Conference held that in Cairns last year,
Yep.
and we had about 150 people in attendance. So we brought that back, and we're off to the Gold Coast in 2025. So
Fantastic.
very much take a lot of pride in that. We're about to approve another regional network,
Yep.
which means that we'll be in every major city from Cairns to Brisbane and out to Toowoomba in terms of our reach. So we're really building something that HR professionals and practitioners can engage in their industry. And I'm really proud of the work the team has achieved over the last 3 years.
That's amazing. Just obviously getting it right from the horse's mouth, from the president, discussing what ARI has done and what ARI is looking to do this year. It's really great to see these initiatives. I wanted to go back to you yourself a little bit more as well. So currently, what are you doing right now, Rod?
So at the moment, Jonathan, I'm working for a business called Habitude, which is habit plus attitude, which obviously creates your behaviours.
Yep.
And we are a behaviour management consultancy.
Yeah.
And part of that work, so I work in the organisational behaviour space. So I do a little bit of work in the employment disability space around individuals. But the majority of my work is in organisational spaces, so working in leadership programs, cultural programs. I do a lot of HR consulting for organisations. The classic, there's a poster on the wall that won't change the behaviours of people. How do I make that poster on the walls, change people's behaviours, that type of work. So it's really, really interesting, and there's a lot of crossover between the individual and collective work.
Yep.
So we do some really interesting stuff. So I'm an Ikigai coaching facilitator, accredited in that space. I'm also an accredited Lego Serious Play facilitator.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we run a really intense leadership self-awareness workshop that focuses on identity, purpose, belonging, and success. And every single person that does that, I say, you will sleep well at night. They all giggle, and I hear from them a few days later, best night's sleep I've had in a long time. But we really challenge that people around self-awareness. It's a workshop. There's no post-it notes. There's no whiteboards. There's no, people take some notes, but it's around really developing people's self-awareness through using Lego as a model to facilitate the discussion, and it's a really powerful tool. But we do that in terms of team dynamics and interpersonal skills. We do it on a problem-solving workshop. It's really about getting people thinking differently, doing things differently. And our motto at Habitude is do different better. And that's what we're about, challenging the way we think, challenging the way we behave, and create better outcomes.
That Lego play is really interesting. I remember being at your office and seeing those Legos there, these massive pieces of Lego, and you explained to me the workshops you ran. It's just such a interesting concept and a fresh concept, and from all reports, he's getting some great reviews.
Well, Jonathan, one of the key things, we had a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and when we do the team dynamics workshop, the last build they do is a group build of what success looks like for the business.
Yeah.
And we take the business owner or the EGM or the general manager out of that build. And this business owner, she said to me afterwards, she goes, I was moved to tears. I have never heard my team talk about my business like that. Now, that is employee engagement 101. You've got fundamental, and as HR practitioners, that's what we want. Employees so engaged, you can touch deeply into the heart and soul of the business, which is the business owner and business leader. That's employee engagement, and that's where you want to get them to. And look, we do it with sporting clubs. I mean, we've done this with a local netball club and had all of their senior coaching team and all of their committee do exactly the same workshop, exactly the same team dynamics, collective build at the end. And the club president, she said she was in exactly the same boat. And it's around that for them is, member engagement in the club. And as a HR practitioner, that's exactly the same thing you want. Oh, it's in a different context of a sporting club. So we really can build some great results for people through those processes.
Your human resources journey has been a long one, which has been, there's the army, you've got the resource section, you've had obviously gone overseas. There's also some name brands that you've worked for. You've worked in government as well, or local government as well. You're now in that sort of more, I'd say, consulting space, but maybe taking a little bit of a different approach with your workshops. Obviously Lego play is just part of that. If I could get you to think back a little bit and go back to the early career you, if you could just time travel a little bit, Rod, what advice would you have for that early career, Rod?
I think there's a tendency these days, and it's just something that I'm observing,
Yeah.
is that people are streaming themselves a little too narrowly early on. Some people want to stay as a generalist, and that's fine. But I think what you need to pick up is 3 or 4 really competent streams that you're good at, and build those capabilities. Maintain your broader generalist capability, but give yourself 3 or 4 capability streams that you want to develop and build over the years. I would have preferred to have done that. There's not so much some gaps, but there's some spaces where I've had to play a bit of catch-up football to get myself back up to speed where I would have liked to have been. So I was very, I don't know, we spoke about it earlier, I've been very strong in my IR background very early on. I probably would have liked to have done a lot more work in the health and wellbeing space to build that in as a complementary stream to the work I do. And I didn't get enough focus in that space. Did a lot of work in organisational design and development, but didn't quite get enough into the L&D stuff. So I think 3 or 4 streams, and then you've got a really good balance of how you make these things work. And I've always had a passion for leadership development, so that's always been in there. But I do notice that some people sit there, suddenly they're in learning and development, and they don't pick up any of the HR capabilities. And then when they want to try to move across, they find it very hard. Or they don't move at all, and they continue to look for roles that reinforce where they are. So, my recommendation to people entering the HR profession is build those 3 or 4 broader streams of capabilities and carry those through your career.
That's one that's really interesting. It's an interesting point because we have a lot of early career HR listening to this podcast. We've also got people that are very senior, and we also have executive level that listen to this. But those early career HR leaders, early career HR people, and then of course the HR leaders that are leading them, I think we get a lot out of that because there is a tendency to still want to specialize. I completely understand that. I think that's completely understandable to get really good at one thing. But your view is that if you were to go back in time, you'd probably pick 3 or 4 that you try to build that competency, and then from there sort of stretch out and build yourself. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, Jonathan, even if you build that, even if you've got this absolute desire to be an OD specialist, you've got to maintain those other capabilities so that you understand where your capability and your work fits with the rest of the business.
That makes sense.
But I have seen people that have sort of become disconnected from the rest of our HR works because they've got so focused on the work they're doing, it doesn't fit. So you've still got to be able to make it fit with the rest of the HR function.
That's more that practical side, isn't it? That practical function, and you sort of hinted at that. Well, actually, no, you talked about quite clearly. Adding that value, making it valuable, showing that value, will get you the financial rewards you need. They'll get the collaboration that you require. They'll get the budget that you need. That completely makes sense. And if you have that understanding more generally of how all the pieces fit, that completely makes sense.
Yeah, and Jonathan, when you put that together, yes, I can come up with the gold-plated, I can come up with the platinum solutions, I can come up with all of those.
Yeah.
Or as we used to say, here's my Commodore solution. It works. It gets you from A to B, and it's practical. And when you show the value of that, then you can incrementally add extra value to that because the people can see the value in it. And I've done this several times over where I've had to rebuild HR functions from scratch or rewrite strategies and talk to people about the value we're putting in, how we're going to create this, what the impacts will be, and how the operational leaders will see the impact of HR. The positive impacts, the things that will make their life easier or the life of their workforces easier so they can focus on doing their job. Let's make it simpler for everybody.
And by the way, those listening, nothing wrong with Commodores, right, Rod? Right?
No.
Nothing wrong with them?
My dad worked for Holden for 50 years. and I own a Ford Mustang.
Now, moving from that young career you, there's obviously a lot of people that are right in the midst right now in human resources. They're either quite experienced people. Maybe they've even moved from a different section or department or area. And then you've got those who are quite senior and even sort of exec level. What are the 2 big pieces of advice you would have for any person in human resources or is currently in human resources?
I think the first big one, and I've seen lots of articles floating around about this, is HR is not your friend. HR is a lackey of the business. Whose side are you on? I can tell you right now, there is no sides in HR, and I think anybody coming into the profession, anybody in the profession, we need to also stop that language. We need to stop thinking about HR having sides. What we do as HR practitioners is make the most appropriate decision in the context which we're in. And not every decision we're going to make is going to make us feel warm and fuzzy. That's okay. I've been down that path. You've got to have that moral courage to stand up and say, this is the best decision we should make. These are the reasons for it. These are your other options. And if somebody else is making that decision, then we accept that they're going to make other options. And it may not be what we think is the best option. But we also need to be able to explain the risk, particularly in the likelihood and consequences of how that risk may materialise. So the person making those decisions can make the best one. And sometimes you're going to have operational leaders or business leaders who are disgruntled because they're not happy with it. But we're making the best decision in the context for the organisation. And it may appear on the side of the employer. Sometimes it might appear on the side of the employee. What you're actually on the side of is best for the business, and that's the way we need to approach it.
That whole idea of not having sides, and I think that's a view that maybe and you sort of hinted at it, that quite a number of people, especially some people that are going to appear on this podcast, maybe have different views. From your perspective, where did you come up with that, I suppose, philosophy or idea? Was that sort of built in the sort of the army side of things, or
The
was it
army,
over
teach,
time? Or
the army gives you a very strong decision making process,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and we talk about risk, we talk about assumptions. The objective decision making process is turn assumptions or unknowns into facts. Work your way through that. But what it also taught me, and this is people don't really understand this in the military, is that you are trained to challenge the decision making process. You're trained to do that. And so I think the biggest thing I found was when I went through doing enterprise bargaining is
yeah,
when this really came to the fore about, do we really need argy bargy over that 2 cents an hour? Because I can achieve this, I can achieve that, and I can end up with much better outcomes for the business and for the employees. And so really sharpened my view on not taking sides, because enterprise bargaining, apart from maybe unfair dismissal, is probably the most obvious place where we end up taking sides as HR practitioners. And from my perspective is build good relationships. I've had, in all of my enterprise bargaining, I've had excellent relationships with most of the people in the bargaining room.
yep,
Not always great with everybody, but certainly done that and worked my way through in a collaborative environment to create the best outcome for the business. And sometimes that is taking things back to your senior leadership, even sometimes taking it back to the CEO and saying, no, this is where we need to land. This is why we need to land here. This is how it works for the business. This is the value I can create out of it. And this is the heat I can take out of our workplace. This is the friction I can remove by doing this. But then that comes back to my earlier point. You've got to understand the cost. So it's
yeah,
no good saying I'm happy to pay. We should pay an extra $2 an hour, unless you understand exactly what that means to the bottom line and what it means to the margin. And I've worked through a very detailed financial model, and I actually find the financing model when I go through enterprise bargaining is sometimes more important than the wording of the clauses. And you can get to a point where that's beautifully worded. It's still going to cost us twice as much as what we can afford. So what was the point of that? So very much from my perspective is understanding the dollars and then understanding the practicalities of it. And I literally sat there one time with the union and argued for 2 hours until they realised, they went, oh yeah, that doesn't make any sense. It won't work. I said, no, that's what I've been telling you for the last couple of hours. Happy to do that, just not the way you've written it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you make it work. Yeah, that's what we should be doing. We're enablers. We make things work.
And that's your one piece of advice. What's the other piece of advice you have?
The other one I have, Jonathan, I think this is in every profession and more
Mm,
so in HR because ours is becoming a much more dynamic environment, is know our stuff
yeah,
and continually improve it incrementally. Look, knowledge is a great backstop when you lack experience or a
yep,
qualification in something. It's just knowing how processes work, knowing and understanding that, doing reading, keeping yourself up to date, having that knowledge, because you're not going to have experience in every single scenario that you come across. So having that knowledge and, okay, never experienced this before, but I know about it. I know the stuff. I can work my way through it with that knowledge. And I think knowledge is incredibly powerful, particularly in a HR function.
there's so many aspects, and I want to touch on that point of knowledge, because there's so many aspects in the HR sphere that really there's almost like a requirement to have some baseline knowledge on so many multiple areas. Okay, obviously the one I know very well is the employment law, but there's much more. Even in health and well-being, there's so many changes, or so much more study going into that, and much more money being poured into that area. Organizational development, change management, even recruitment. We've got AI now sort of filtering into there as well. Um, you know, issues around just the use of social media in organizations where social media is used quite a lot. Just even new stuff around leadership, and almost a conflicting views from conflicting parties about what that all means. There just seems to be so much out there. How does how does a HR practitioner in any type of context, any type of industry, and in any type of role, how do they almost hone in on the knowledge that they probably need as a baseline, and then of course whatever interests them from there? How does it work?
I think the key point there, Jonathan,
Mm.
is honing in.
Hmm.
And it comes back to my point earlier is that sometimes we hone in on some things too deeply.
Yep.
And we need to keep a balance between depth and breadth of our knowledge. There are plenty of brilliant articles on LinkedIn. I'm constantly reading articles on LinkedIn. There's books to be read. There's about 8 on my bedside table. There's probably another 8 on my bookshelf that I haven't read yet.
Yep.
It's about having an appetite for knowledge, balancing it up with then using that in the practical aspects of your work.
Yeah.
There's times there when you might be a organisational development person within a business. You've got an org psych degree. You've got a couple of other accreditations, and you're reading about those things. But you also then need to understand, okay, this has a flow-on effect in the health and well-being space. So, what articles am I reading? How am I keeping up the space to that? I subscribe to newsletters, subscribe to some. I don't like the expression, but some thought leaders that are out there,
Yep.
and read books and go to conferences, go to seminars. A lot of them are virtual these days, so it's not hard to do, and a lot of them are free. So go and do those types of things and keep yourself up to date. There's always somebody that's going to know something that you don't know, but it doesn't make them smarter than you. It doesn't mean they know more than you. They just knew something that you didn't have a chance to get to know, but now you do.
Yep.
So you can move on from that space. So really around that incremental understanding and that incremental increase in your knowledge.
On that point as well, what's your view on formal qualifications in HR? Do you think it is necessary? Do you think it's something that should be done? What are your thoughts?
I'm a big believer in qualifications.
Hmm.
I'm not a big believer in having an A4 list of qualifications.
Yep.
I'm also a big believer in industry certification. So I've got a couple of industry certifications. The Australian HR Institute does a certification program for HR practitioners. Very big on those because they are telling you that as per an industry standard, you are certified as a practitioner in your chosen field. So do that. I'm big on micro credentials. These days, some people do one master's after another. I would prefer if you've got a master's degree, go and do some graduate certificates.
Mm.
Do a very specific graduate certificate around your second capability stream. Do another graduate certificate in your other capability stream. Doing some shorter courses, doing a range of different things that help build your knowledge, recognizing that some of these give you practical application in the workplace
Yep.
and some of them just give you a deeper understanding of your profession. So balancing it out, yes, there will be people out there that tell you that I've got 30 years of experience. There's no doubt that that person can do the job. There's no doubt that at all, but it doesn't mean that they'll be able to do it as good as somebody who's got 20 years with a degree or 10 years with a couple of degrees. It all comes back to the person and how they apply their knowledge. So really important from my perspective. Yes, qualifications and industry certification are important.
Great. And just sort of coming off that, you've been in HR for quite a long time now. What are the biggest challenges you're facing now, and how are you tackling it?
So the biggest challenge I think we're facing now is business leaders under pressure are not making the right decisions.
Okay.
So they're culturally going for the easy option. And I've seen that in real time. People ignoring really good quality advice, sometimes even ignoring legal advice and making decisions that you just sit there and go, that's not going to work.
Yep.
Not going to work at all. And I think that's why I'm really passionate about that leaders plus values equals culture, because the values need to be, if you're going to say that one of them is integrity or ethics, then the business leaders need to live that. And I think that's our biggest challenge at the moment, is getting our business leaders to stand up with the moral courage to say, no, that's not okay. And you could rattle it off. Jonathan, you'd have examples, 4 or 5 examples of business leaders who aren't doing the right thing. We see that all the time.
Yeah.
And it's about holding them accountable. And that's probably not what we've done well over the last 5 to 10 years.
Your views on leadership, just not making those right decisions, or maybe at least in your view, not making those right decisions. And you said there about, instead of taking the easy option, what are you saying in terms of, what's your classification of easy option? What do you mean by that? And of course, I don't want necessarily specific examples of in organisation being in, but what do you actually mean by that easy option or easy?
So I won't name anybody, but I did some work with an organisation. Very clearly, they had missed the award rate change from the 1 July the previous year.
Yeah.
And that was January. So we went through the process, worked it out, and said, this is the back pay you're going to need to pay them. This is what you need to do. And the accountants were like, oh, that's X amount of money. And I said, I appreciate that, but that's what you should have been paying since 1 July last year.
Yeah, yeah.
And their option was, well, the employees don't know about it, so we're not doing anything about it. So they didn't. And then one of the employees read about wage theft. And then it must have been in that article they talked about, since the award rates went up on 1 July last year. And he went, well, our pay rates didn't go up. So we asked the question, the unions got involved, and the Fair Work Ombudsman came to give him a visit around wage theft. So that was an easy option for them to take, do nothing.
Yes.
They had a little bit of a harder option, was to go through, do all the calculations, pay that money that they owed, understand the financial impacts, because we're not immune to that. We understand that, but it's an obligation. You can't just walk away from that. And so you see that happen. I've also seen leaders terminate senior leaders and use non-disclosure agreements, or just pay them out of money just so that they go away. Not resolve the issues, not accept the fact that they've been held accountable, just denying everything. And if we just pay enough hush money, it all goes away. And I think that part of it's starting to come unstuck in businesses these days as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's still a lot of water under the bridge when it comes to stuff like NDAs and deeds and everything else. And there may well be some changes this year, but putting that all aside, I think you're saying is that underpinning mentality of, well, and that wage issue was obviously a good example. If we don't do anything now, then it obviously we'll obviously have to deal with it maybe in the future, but not right now. If we just don't do it right now, it's okay. You see and it's probably those types of examples that's led to so many of these law changes. Like if you look at a lot of these legal changes, right to disconnect, psychosocial risk and hazards, like all these changes have come from examples where organizations have made, it's probably the easier decision as opposed to the more difficult decision. But I think the key part is, this is the thing, Keith, Rod, I think a lot of organizations got away with it. And that's where a lot of leaders got away with it. And that's what's precipitated the problems. Instead of just doing once, they're doing it multiple times. And you're starting to see, and that's obviously an easy, not an easy one, but it's a more straightforward decision-making process, because we're talking about the law, right?
Yeah.
But when you start talking about something a bit more difficult, where, okay, maybe the law doesn't come into it as much when it comes to maybe, say, health and well-being, although the law does come into it a little bit. There are difficult decisions that you can make, and there's much more easier decisions you can make.
Well, Jonathan, a really good example. There was about a dozen senior HR people sitting around a table a few years ago. Mm-hmm. I was the odd one out, and I said to them, this labour hire practices we have in the coal industry, because Mackay is at the heart of the coal industry,
Yep.
I said, that's going to come unstuck. And a very unpopular decision. And we talked through a range of things, and we sat down, and the things that we talked about are all those things that have come through around the changes to labour hire legislation and the licensing and how you categorise labour hire and casual employment and all those types of things. You could see that there was just a disagreement on how much that would become an issue.
Yes.
And I said to him, it'll come unstuck and it'll stuff it up for everybody, which to a degree it has.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can see it coming a mile away, but the easy option was, well, we hope that doesn't happen, and everybody knows that hope's not a plan. So, but that was visible. You could see that coming. You could see where those agitation points were going to be, and they've come to fruition. So there's no surprise when you see those things, and there's no surprise with the psychosocial code around, the bullying, the harassment, people being unwell in the workplace. You can see that coming, and we, as organisations, we don't do enough to change that. So governments then decide, well, if you're not going to change it yourself, we'll legislate it so you have to. Or we'll put regulation in that forces you to do so. Or we'll change the awards of what goes in the industrial instruments to make that change for you. So I think what we can do is get better as organisations, and that's where HR's accountability is around informing organisations on how they can change things for the better. I know of organisations for whom the labour hire changes made no difference to what they did.
Yeah.
Because they were already ahead of the game. They were already doing what we would call best practice. So yeah, it's pretty simple from my perspective.
Going from that, and maybe you have already answered this question a little bit, but what is the one thing about human resource that people might disagree with you about?
So I actually just had this conversation earlier today and yesterday. So there are some people within the HR profession who believe that IR is fundamental to the way HR works in organisations.
Yeah.
And I love having this discussion with them because there's a perception, because I disagree with that people think that I disagree with IR being important. I think IR is incredibly important, but I don't think it's fundamental. I think what is fundamental to an organisation from a HR perspective is culture. It's that innate people relationships. We are people first and foremost. And I've worked in organisations where I had to check. Like, we do have an industrial instrument, don't we? And people went, yeah, but nobody refers to that because we just had a great culture that had to go and do it. And I've worked in an organisation of 600 people that had no industrial instrument at all.
Yep.
So yes, it's important, but fundamentally underpinning HR, my belief, is culture.
Yep.
And that's not always popular. And I'm happy to have that discussion. When people find out that's my opinion, I usually have that discussion.
So for those who want to have that discussion, reach out to Rod at some point. You can hit it up on LinkedIn. You can do all that type of stuff, and I'm sure you can have some robust, but of course, polite discussions and courteous discussions about that. I think that's something that is definitely discussed a lot, and I think there's different philosophies around what is important and fundamental in human resources. Your view that IR is, it's essential and it's important, but it's not fundamental to what HR does. It's a very interesting point, especially considering that you come from a background where there has been very, very strong union presence. You've had loads of enterprise bargaining experience. So to hear you say that is actually really interesting, that culture is actually the big one. That's the big piece.
And Jonathan, I'll put it in the context that I've worked bargaining with some fairly militant union members, both delegates and organisers.
Yep.
And I've literally sat down and we've had discussions around what sort of culture do we want to create in our organisation and how do we go about it. And how do we, I literally have sat with a very militant union organiser. I said, I want this to reflect the fact that this business actually genuinely cares about this issue that you've raised. And I think this is the best way to do it. And they've looked at me and gone, really? And I've gone, yes. It's not about what I'm about to write in this industrial instrument. It's about how we make this work in real life and how it is practical for our employees and for their members. And if you can get to that space where you can work collaboratively, and it's not always going to happen, I get that. If you can get to that space, the industrial instrument just becomes the bit of paper that you have to have, as opposed to the thing that creates the culture. So I think you can get to that space.
Yeah, so moving away from what actually has to be in place, essentially, i.e., your legal obligations, as an example, but actually going, well, actually, culture is like the centerpiece of it,
Yeah.
and industrial instruments and new contracts. Yes, we have to have those in place, but they shouldn't be the baseline for everything that we do in the HR space. I think that's a really good point. Mate, can I change direction a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it's a tradition on the HR Engage podcast that we ask like these rapid fire questions about you, because obviously today is all about you. We've got people who are listening who are early in their career. They might have changed from a completely different career into HR. You've got the experienced people, and you've got some executive level HR practitioners listening to this. So they want to find out a little bit about you, Rod. So I've got a few questions, rapid fire questions. I'm going to fire away. First thing that comes to your mind, just answer, okay? Sound good?
I'm ready to go.
All right, he's ready to go.
A little nervous, but ready to go.
All right, Rod. So what is your favorite movie?
Oh, favorite movie. Okay. I probably got three.
Okay, go.
I've got a military background, so A Few Good Men,
Of course.
Black Hawk Down,
Oh.
and a non-military one, Animal Kingdom, the Australian version.
Oh.
Yes.
That's controversial. That's a controversial one. Animal Kingdom, the Australian version. Wow. Well, I mean, all good movies. Obviously, A Few Good Men, Black Hawk Down. Are those your favorite movies? Just was it your army background, or is there another reason for it?
In the last scenes where they've got the Pakistanis in the stadium, two of my mates were there. So at the time, so I got a very real connection to that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And A Few Good Men, that sense of justice of the organisation looking after the people that can't look after themselves, that really appeals to my sense of social justice. So, and Animal Kingdom, it's just an awesome movie.
It's a good movie. It's good. It's good. Controversial is the Australian version, but I think I'm actually with you on that one. I think that's a good shout.
Thankfully, it was done first. So
yes. You can
So,
claim that. What's your favourite holiday destination, Rod?
Look, my favourite holiday destination also coincides with my dream job. Okay. I'd love to be a writer on the surf coast at a winery. Writer in residence. I grew up surfing. I love wineries. I love being near the ocean. Love all that. So, but more importantly for me, I'd like to go somewhere where I can dive into the culture. I would happily go to one town, one city, and spend 2 weeks there really being immersed in the culture rather than, say, maybe hopping from places to places. So I tend to find if I go on a holiday for a couple of weeks, I might go to one, maybe two places and really immerse myself. So much prefer to do that.
That's incredible. Are you a good writer?
Yes. So that's something about me that a lot of people don't realise.
Yes.
Is I'm both a shortlisted and published poet and short story author, which a lot of people like, wow. So, so 2024 was supposed to be the year of my own anthology. Maybe 2025 when I find some time. So,
wow. I'm surprised, but you know what? That links with your dream locations and your favorite holiday destinations. I can actually see you doing that, Rod. I can see it.
Funny, Jonathan. People look at me like army background, resource industry, HR. They're like, you're a published poet. It's like, yeah, and shortlisted. So, haven't won anything big yet, but I'm working on it.
That sounds good. I wait a breath for more. If you get that, if you actually get a win, we'll get you back on, and you can recite that winning poem. What's apart from family and friends, who has inspired you the most?
It's a very odd choice, and people think it's a little dark.
Yeah.
Anthony Bourdain, who's that chef and author.
Yeah.
talked about experiencing, and here's where I get my sense of wanting to immerse myself in a culture. So very strong sense from his perspective is that his idea of food was not about the food itself necessarily, but more around the culture and getting down into the more commonplace aspect of the food. So yeah, it really gives me a sense of positioning yourself and grounding. Really, really good sense of grounding in watching his shows and reading his work.
Yeah, great. What's the thing you do outside of work that you're passionate about or keeps you going?
So obviously, I'm a veteran, so I work in the veteran space. I'm the president of the local RSL. Do a lot of work around engaging with younger veterans, so East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan veterans, and getting them into good spaces. So really do a lot of work in that space, and also in the youth space. So I'm on a couple of boards for a local youth service. I'm on the board for Variety Queensland, really around trying to improve the lives of younger people wherever we can. So that's what I do outside of work.
Great, that's fantastic. And if you could recommend a book, movie, TV show, or podcast to listeners, what would it be and why?
Look, I think there's an absolute myriad of choices, and it's really hard to pin one down.
You have a lot of interest, Rod. So yes, I can see why you had hard to pin this one down.
Yeah, so look, my original degree was in international politics,
Wow.
and so really, from my perspective, and I was introduced to this author, PJ O'Rourke. He passed away a couple of years ago. So he wrote, he's a great satirist, Rolling Stone magazine books, but he's got an omnibus called Thrown Under the Omnibus. So it's a great book. I was recently given a copy of that for Christmas, so I would recommend that to anybody. It's a great escapism, and it gives you a very, very sharper view on, yeah, particularly US politics, but also US politics in the global context. It's just a great read.
Oh, okay. That's what I'm going to put down in mind.
And just say, for the record, I don't lend my books out.
Fair enough. Don't ask for any borrowed books.
Don't ask.
You go buy it yourself or get on Audible or whatever you do. Okay.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm a hard copy. I'm a hard copy.
You're a hard copy guy.
Yeah, book in my hand. Yeah.
And is there a quote or a moment of inspiration you'd like to leave us with?
I suppose I've studied a lot of history, both military, political, got a very strong sense of social justice, and have seen how horrible we can be to each other. But the one thing that sticks with me, and it is a very well-known, but I think people misunderstand who first said it, and it's by Emiliano Zapata, the Mexican revolutionary, who said, "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees." And that's my view, is that, fight for what you believe in. And you don't have to take that in a literal sense.
Yes.
You can take it in a metaphorical sense, but certainly, fight for what you believe in, and fight for the just cause. And I think sometimes we don't get that very well done. Yeah. We don't get that right.
And I think that comes really strongly out of this discussion today, that you've obviously built some really, really strong foundations from your army days. You've got formal qualifications. Obviously, you've worked in. You obviously you're the Queensland State President with ARI, but your focus has been really culture, that leadership and values has been culture, and you really push that forward very, very clearly in your thoughts today. And even when we sort of talked about, what's something different or something controversial, necessarily not controversial, but maybe something that people disagree with you, you said that, look, IR is not it. It's not the only thing, and really it should be culture. That's really at the center point of human resources, and that's really interesting considering your background.
Yeah.
And also what you do as well.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, back in 2018, my CEO and my team nominated me for the Dave Ulrich ARI Leadership Excellence Award, national award. And they nominated it quite literally on my work. I did a council with the senior leadership team around leadership plus values equals culture. So 2018, I was nominated. I was a finalist. Didn't quite get there. The feedback was they wanted some more data. That drives a lot of my sense around, yes, I need more data to demonstrate the
Yeah.
value. We did some more data, we did some more work, and with the support of the CEO and the team again, they nominated me back in for the second year in 2019. And in 2019, I won that award, the David Ulrich HR Leadership Excellence Award, for the work in that exact thing: leadership plus values equals culture. So, from my perspective, I know that it works, and I know that it is industry best practice and an industry standard. So, very comfortable from that perspective.
Right, it's been absolute pleasure because you're award winning. You've got all this great experience. You've got these fantastic viewpoints. I've really loved talking to you on the HR Engage podcast. It's been great to get your perspective on so many aspects, get your philosophy on HR, get your journey to HR, even just some, I think there's some gold nuggets as well for those who are listening as well that they can pick up and really look into a little bit more, and that whole knowledge base. You talk about that knowledge base and increase that knowledge. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on board here for the HR Engage podcast. Thank you so much, Rod.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. It's a little uncomfortable talking about myself, but it's been great to provide some just some understanding for HR practitioners and others who are listening into the podcast. So thank you.
I think it's been so much value to those who are listening. So I'm Jonathan Mamaril. This is the HR Engage podcast. Speak soon.